Friends, many brothers, I hope we are all well. We are in the season of Lent. We are journeying with Christ in these 40 days together. And yet we continue to reflect on our behind the scene podcast. We have just finished the book of the Gospel of Mark. And so I just want us to remember a few things as we conclude this book. That Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospel because they use the same source in terms of the stories. They do use different views and point of emphasis amongst the three, but it is clear when you read them that they've used the same source. And Mark is deemed to be the oldest gospel, and so it is the shortest, and yet it carries within itself a beautiful outline of Jesus' life. And so Mark is particularly writing to the Gentiles. And so his view about the Jesus story from the onset is all about what we call deconstruction. Of course, in the wider field of theology, it is called deconstruction theology. But we see Mark trying to emphasize to his readers. And the reason why he's using this point of view is because, remember, there's still a struggle between the Jews and Gentiles. Who is a believer, who is not a believer. So you are having Jews that believe that Gentiles cannot accept salvation because salvation is not for them. And you have Gentiles, excuse me, who have a conviction that the Christ that we have had, the Christ that we continue to see miracles happening, is not just the Christ for some, but is the Christ for all of us. And so that's why Mark uses the approach of deconstruction to say there are things that we must deconstruct that has been at the forefront of the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ. The first thing that we must deconstruct, it is this Jesus who is for the Jew, and therefore the gospel is for the Jew. The second thing that we must deconstruct from the minds and the hearts of people is that Gentiles cannot then believe. This gospel is not for them. The third thing that we must deconstruct is the location, because then Israel becomes, or Jerusalem or the temple becomes then this place that for centuries people come from all over to worship. So the centralization of this gospel and this good news to Jerusalem must be deconstructed so that this gospel can reach the ends of the earth. And so hence my theme today is about bringing down the walls, breaking the walls. And I want us to use the image which Jesus uses. I know Jesus uses in the different contexts about the temple and the destruction of the temple. Jesus says that to his listeners and hearers, this temple will not stand forever. And then interpreters will say, no, he meant his body, that in 3 days he can destroy this temple and in 3 days bring it up. And then the writer says, no, he meant his body, As much as that might have meant his body, but I want us to understand the symbolism that Jesus is trying to deconstruct the centralization of this gospel to be barricaded inside a wall, which is the temple, and which have caused then people to close their minds and their hearts to this building rather than open their hearts to God. And so Jesus is saying, this is not the place where only God dwells. God dwells in the hearts of everyone, of all creation. And so for us to get to that point, we must break these walls. And so in breaking these walls, we must keep watch. We must watch. We must be careful. We must be alert. Because now this temple now has become a center of people not having access. It has become, the temple was meant to be a place that brings life, but now it has become a place where people are denied life because the temple has become a place for some, not for all people. So break down the walls, destroy this temple, this physical temple, and the new temple will be built, which will not be dimmed by a location. It will not be dimmed by the magnificence of the building, but it will be dimmed by God's love, by God's grace, by God's mercy and justice. And so the new temple is not defined by walls or the light or everything that is in it, but it is defined by the actions which alleviate and challenge the livelihoods of people. And so break down the walls. Break down the walls which we continue to build, knowing that these walls are not helpful in the discourse of the grace and love of Jesus. And so at the heart of Mark's gospel, it's all about deconstructing, deconstructing, deconstructing the things that have become barriers into us meeting each other. There are many walls that the church continues to build, which needs to be brought down. If as a church we are still offended by a God who loves a person who has a different sexuality than me, if the church is still offended by a God who loves women as equally as men, if the church is still offended by a God who loves children, who loves young people, who loves the foreigner, if the church is still offended by the church that is unified and the church that understands or that should understand the poor, the marginalized, and that should live in everything they do to open up doors for such people. If the church is still offended, then those walls need to come down. Because we cannot continue to be the church that is building up walls, centralizing this good news to be for some people, to be suitable for some and not for all of God's creation, then Mark is saying to us, we are sinning against God. Because in Mark's gospel, we see Jesus, we see the Messiah, who is saying, if it is not about justice, if it's not about the grace of God, if it's not about the love of God, then you can have the magnificent of everything that you have. You can have the best robes. You can have all the best things. You can pray, you can fast, but all those things become meaningless because the essence of the gospel you have missed. Deconstructing the walls. We continue to want to be a society that is building up walls. We can't continue in that narrative. If the only thing we're worried about is having a church that have light and water and aircons, and we have missed the point of who we are. And unfortunately, we continue to build up walls which are not helpful, who cannot speak into the times that we are in. Keep watch, be alert, so that what we do can be defined, can go through the test of love, the test of justice, the test of grace. And I'm saying, friends, to us, if reading this scripture does not help us to and we are in a season of Lent, of giving up, let us allow God to help us to give up the things which continue to cause us to build up walls. Let us journey with God to give up. Because even the building that we call our place of worship, if it has become an opportunity for us to build more walls, then those walls need to come down. Because the Jews became offended when Jesus said this temple can come down or will come down. And in 3 days, I will build a temple. That is not defined by color, by beauty, which is not barricaded, but a temple where it will find everyone where they are. And everyone will get life, will find life. And so, friends, as we conclude this gospel, what are some of the things we have constructed which needs to be deconstructed? You can search deconstruction theology, which speaks on issues of liberation theology, black theology. We speak of issues of equality. We speak of issues that are dividing the church. And I don't understand, why are we divided on such issues? Because Christ have already spoke to these issues and given us a remedy. But because we are more interested in building the walls which continue to separate us, and the last 4 chapters become for some people eschatological, for me, it's not just eschatological, something that is going to happen in the future, the Christ that comes in glory in a physical form. It is the Christ that comes each and every day in our lives because of that deconstructed heart. It's a Christ that comes in glory and newness each and every day in our life and in God's creation. But we continue to ignore that God because we want to build walls which are not helpful.